Ijeoma Oluo, so you want to talk about race. Embark on a transformative journey through So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo, exploring the intersections of race, privilege, and systemic oppression in today's society. Understand the importance of recognizing and dismantling racism entrenched in our institutions and everyday lives. This book summary provides an overview of crucial themes such as implicit bias in policing, the impact of cultural appropriation, tone policing, the model minority myth, and the necessity of intersectionality. By delving into these topics, you can begin to challenge your own assumptions and actively work toward promoting racial justice and equality in your communities.
The inextricable link between racism and power. In this book, author Ijeoma Oluo addresses the misconception that societal problems in America are about class rather than race. She argues that addressing class alone cannot improve things for minorities, as race is one of the largest variables determining success in the U.S. Racism is woven into and reinforced by systems of power, and it justifies white supremacy. Oluo defines racism as prejudice against someone because of their race when those views are reinforced by systems of power. She emphasizes that the only way to fight systemic oppression is by personally and actively dismantling it. To determine if something is about race, consider whether a person of color thinks it's about race, if it affects people of color differently or disproportionately, and if it fits into a larger pattern affecting people of color. Uncomfortable conversations about race. Author Ijeoma Oluo recounts the first time she had a serious conversation about race with her white mother, who told her coworkers a racist joke with a black punchline. Oluo broke down the differences between being white and being black in a white supremacist society, leading her mother to shift her focus to motivating other white people to combat racism. The key message is that having uncomfortable conversations about race is a necessary first step for progress. Guidelines include stating intentions, doing research, avoiding defensiveness, and not policing tone. These conversations may go wrong, but it's crucial to commit to trying again. Checking your privilege. This book summary delves into the importance of recognizing one's privilege and adopting intersectionality to combat personal and societal oppression. The author explains how checking one's privilege means questioning when you receive benefits denied to others and taking steps to give up those benefits. Intersectionality is a holistic theory and practice that illuminates the way in which race and gender shape a person's experience of the world. The author encourages reflection on how privilege has shaped one's point of view and seeking out work on political and social issues from diverse perspectives. By incorporating intersectionality into conversations about race and social justice and prioritizing it, efforts to improve society can become more inclusive and less oppressive. Implicit bias in policing. In her book, Mediocre: The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, Ijeoma Oluo highlights the role of implicit bias in policing and the need to cultivate trust to bring about meaningful change. The book delves into the unfortunate history of police brutality against people of color, which has been perpetuated by a system of unexamined beliefs and policies. Even today, statistics show that black drivers are more likely to be pulled over, ticketed, and arrested, leading to a higher probability of being killed by police. Oluo emphasizes the importance of recognizing implicit bias and pushing for real change, such as investing in education and infrastructure and demanding justice for all. Ultimately, the book challenges white people to believe and stand with people of color, rather than perpetuating dangerous myths and stereotypes. Advancing equal opportunities. Growing up poor, intersectional feminist and author Ijeoma Oluo experienced firsthand how society places impassable hurdles in front of marginalized people. The more experienced she became in her career, the more she found herself the only woman of color in the room. The key message of her story is that expanded affirmative action can mitigate some of the impact of historical oppression. Affirmative action was first introduced in the 1960s to address severe racial disparities in higher education and federal employment. However, since Reagan's presidency, affirmative action has eroded significantly, with conservative administrations viewing it as unnecessary. Nevertheless, discrimination and inequality continue to persist. Studies indicate patterns of unfairness begin at early childhood education, where black pupils' behavior is more scrutinized and discipline is stricter for minor issues. Besides, children of color attend underfunded schools, which means by college application, they significantly disadvantaged compared to their white peers. Therefore, the ultimate objective of affirmative action is to address systemic issues that create and sustain gaps in opportunity and representation, thus reducing social and economic disparities in the United States. The school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline is a disturbing trend that adversely affects students of color. It begins with discriminatory disciplinary tactics, which disproportionately punish Black and Hispanic students, leading to their imprisonment later on in life. Punitive measures such as suspensions and expulsions reduce the self-esteem of these students and erode their trust in the school system. Aham's experience provides a typical example of the school-to-prison pipeline. Eventually, punitive measures lead to imprisonment, especially for people of color. Finally, we need to challenge white education, create an inclusive curriculum, and help reduce the racial opportunity gap so that all students are treated fairly. Tools of oppression. The N-word, cultural appropriation, and microaggressions are all tools of oppression. Language is how we process the world, and from the 1700s on, the N-word was used as a slur to dehumanize and express hatred of Black people. Microaggressions are constant, small insults and indignities lodged at people of a marginalized or oppressed group. Cultural appropriation is when a more dominant culture exploits an oppressed culture by adopting their practices, customs, and ideas. These tools reinforce the notion that someone is less than and perpetuate oppression and inequality. It's important to address microaggressions directly and to do your research to understand why something might be offensive. Fighting tone policing and the model minority myth. In her book, the author challenges the notion that the only acceptable way to approach racial justice is through nonviolence and pacifism. The author also stresses that dismissing cries for justice because of tone is tone policing. She further highlights the harmful effect of the model minority myth, which fetishizes Asian Americans and erases the experiences of swaths of the Asian American population, particularly refugees. Additionally, the author urges people to make fighting systemic racism their moral obligation and to avoid urging marginalized individuals to prioritize their approval. Combating systemic oppression. Ijeoma Oluo's book, Mediocre, sheds light on how young people are fighting against systemic oppression, and how we can examine our own racism to take action against it. Growing up in the 1980s, Ijeoma Oluo was taught that racism was outdated and if you worked hard, opportunities were not denied based on the color of your skin. However, the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act and the crack epidemic accelerated the criminalization and mass incarceration of Black and brown people. Today, young people are denouncing a system of exceptionalism that allowed the criminalization, incarceration, and murder of those deemed less exceptional. To combat systemic oppression and fight for justice, we must examine our own racism. As a white person, if you are called racist, don't freak out or dismiss it. Listen and be willing to let go of the idea of seeing yourself as good. Accept that you were born into and have enjoyed the privileges of a racist, white supremacist society, meaning you have been complicit in maintaining those structures. It's also important to accept that you will never fully understand the effects of systemic racism on people of color, and no one representing these communities owes you an explanation. If you absolutely disagree that you committed a racist act, do not invalidate that person's pain. The goal shouldn't be proving that you aren't racist, but finding out if you are and resolving the hurt you caused if possible. Talking about race is a good first step, but to dismantle white supremacy, we must take action. We can do so by voting locally, supporting businesses owned by people of color, boycotting banks and businesses that prey on people of color, donating to organizations fighting for racial justice, and putting pressure on local government to end racial bias in policing. Time is running out, and we must learn and fight simultaneously.
Ijeoma Oluo's So You Want to Talk About Race offers a powerful invitation to engage in meaningful conversations and take proactive steps toward dismantling racism in the United States. The book encourages readers to reflect upon complex subjects such as intersectionality, privilege, and the historical and contemporary challenges faced by people of color. As you consider the key messages and insights presented in the summary, remember that fostering inclusivity and promoting racial justice requires ongoing self-awareness, education, and action. With each of us embracing this responsibility, we can collectively contribute to creating a more equitable and just society.